Hey there, little Babs. It's Haley Heartless here. I just want to talk to you about a little workshop I'm putting together, and I'm hoping I might be able to present it at a conference in October. And I'll link to that conference down in the description. But if you're watching this after October 2018, you're not going to be able to go to that conference. Um, I'm also going to be talking about this topic at an upcoming event called Expressions of Belonging, and that's in late September, and I'll put a link to that in the description as well. Um, and the topic I want to talk about is transformative justice, and this workshop I'm putting together called The Burden of Transformation. And in this workshop, I talk about why transformative justice activists do what we do. So I got involved in the social justice scene and the queer scene in really heavily in about 2016, and I had heard about disposability culture, and I'd heard a little bit about transformative justice from some books I'd read. There was this excellent book called Learning Good Consent that sort of gave me my first ideas of what transformative justice meant. And then there was some everyday feminism articles that talked a bit about disposability culture, but I never really put it together until I got really heavily involved in the queer scene, and I saw this pattern of trans women messing up and then losing their community. And for me, as a trans woman, I know how important it is to have a community, especially if you're not out. Our online communities are often all we have, and if we don't have a community, it's so devastating for our mental health. Like, having a community is one of the things that they make sure you have before they give you hormones, because they know that trans women who don't have a community, their chances of survivability aren't very great. So when I saw trans women, often with a lot of social capital, mess up and get called out and then lose everything, I wanted to help them. So I really sort of casually started just talking to them, making sure they understood the gravity of the situation, the fact that I wasn't giving them an excuse, and the fact that even if you do everything right and you take accountability and you manage to repair that relationship with the community, things aren't going to be the same. Because if you want things to go back to how they were before your call out, that's not really accountability. That's just wanting to fix things. And so I started doing this really sort of casually, and as I was doing this, I started learning a bit about accountability, and I didn't actually realize at first that I was doing transformative justice work. And so I messed up a lot because I had no education. I hadn't really read very much. And so I started attending workshops, and I started reading about transformative justice, and I started to be part of this solution. And I got involved with people. I would gravitate towards people who were accused of their community of doing some really awful things, and some people who had done really awful things but didn't know how to come out and try and heal the damage that they'd caused would come to me to try and figure that out too. And so this put me in a weird situation where I was seen as always being around abusers, and I was labeled as somebody who would coddle abusers, and I ended up losing community because of that too, which is valid. If somebody is causing harm, you absolutely have a right to distance yourself from them and from the people around them. But as a community, we can't just dispose of people. I mean, there's a few exceptions. There are certain people who we need to distance ourselves from. But I think 9 times out of 10, people can transform after they've caused harm. And so the burden falls on transformative justice activists who are often maligned in our own communities. And it also falls on the community as well, because if we just get rid of people, we are pushing them into another community. It's like having a garden with weeds in it, and we can go at those weeds with a weed whacker, and we can spread the seeds into our neighbors' yards, our neighbors who are probably more marginalized than us and probably don't have the facilities to fix that. Or we can take that weed and we can pull it out from the roots, and we can get on our hands and knees and do some of the dirty work and take that weed and put it in a little pot somewhere. And, you know, everybody knows that it's a weed, but we're going to put it on our windowsill, and it's still part of the garden, but it's over here. And sometimes it can play with the other flowers, and sometimes it can't. And that way, as a community, we are taking accountability for some of the problems that spring up in our community, and we're taking accountability for perhaps some of the attitudes and situations that we foster in our community to, you know, that facilitate or create the situations in which harm can happen. And I don't want to sound like I'm blaming the community because we have an abuser, but we do have people who cause harm in our community, and there are things that we do to mitigate that harm. Like, you know, we might have a play party that's got a no locked doors policy. That is something we are doing as a community to mitigate harm, even though if harm happens, it's nobody's blame except for the person who's caused harm. We can still do things as a community, and by analyzing situations in which harm has happened, we can create better procedures and minimize the number of situations in which harm can happen, whether intentional or unintentional. So I think the burden of transformation also falls on not just transformative justice activists, who are often these social butterflies that go from community to community because we're always seen associated with harm and pain and danger, and we can't get settled in anywhere because we do some really traumatic work. But the burden also falls on our communities as well, to take ownership of the fact that harm does happen in our community, and that we do have a burden to try and mitigate that. So my workshop, The Burden of Transformation, talks about this, and it puts the idea of transformative justice into the heads of people who don't necessarily understand transformative justice. It contrasts it to other types of justice, like carceral justice and restorative justice. And the point that I try to make is that if we can have communities that foster transformation, then we can have safe, healthy, happy communities, not just for ourselves, but also for the communities within our neighborhood as well. So if you're interested in this workshop, you can hit me up on my website, and I can give you sort of ideas of how it's structured, how we can put it together, and prices, obviously. We can do it as a very structured regimen with a workshop and paper, or I could just come and talk to your group for 5 minutes about it. I like long workshops personally, because especially on this topic, it's such an important topic. It's impossible to cover in 5 minutes. So the workshop is called The Burden of Transformation, and hopefully I'll be doing it at the Women in Arms conference, but if I don't do it, I'll be doing one of my other workshops as well. And I offer a lot of cool sex positive, trans / community accountability workshops. And if you like the work that I do, feel free to drop me a line and ask me if there's any way you can donate. I like to have Starbucks gift cards. I can accept donations by credit card. I can accept Interac email money transfers. So, and of course I've also got an Amazon wish list. So yeah, the burden of transformation. I think it's a really great workshop, especially if you're a community that's just starting to learn about community accountability and starting to turn away from disposability and carceral justice culture. I would highly recommend it, and I hope to hear from you. Bye.